Coleto Animal Health is an Australian company which develops and sells products worldwide to help horses feel well and so perform well today and tomorrow. We produce a range of horse health and nutrition products that are recognised all over the world for their ability to maximise the condition of your horse, increase performance and the overall health. With Coleto, your four most common horse issues are solved.
So you're in an environment where there's a lot of distractions for a young horse or a horse that hasn't been out, and we're taking to a new environment. And you're just getting the horse to listen and be a little more focused on you. Better Calm comes in two forms, so a powder and a paste. So we find the paste great. You'll get a better focus and response from the horse. So your performance reflects the horse's health. So if the horse his health is not, isn't perfect, it's not going to perform well.
If you haven't got the right muscle tone, be it a young horse or an old horse, if you can't get the right top line on them, you're in trouble. I mean, you just will not get that horse there. I know this product works because a horse that has been down and out and not going very well, as soon as I put them on as anabolic, they start eating better, they look better in the eye first, which will tell you everything. They're running well, and they're pulling up even better.
Swell Down is a product that I've used for 3 years at least. We use it daily. We use it at big competitions. It gets used on every horse at the end of the event, and we know that they're safe then on the trip home. You need to eliminate any possibility that there might be a problem for trot up, and to protect your horse. Like if there is in a way we can improve its health and its soundness, well then we're going to do that. So if we can use the Swell Down, we know we're helping the horse as much as we can and eliminating as much risk for their soundness next day.
Coleto is driven to achieve real and measurable results for your horse through innovative and quality products. We are continuously researching new products and forming strategic alliances with animal health organisations around the world. Coleto products must provide a proven benefit to your horse that are unique, value for money, and that will deliver genuine, worthwhile results to you. Coleto is supported by equine nutritionists, specialist equine veterinarians, and other technical advisors to ensure that information supporting our products reflects the latest in equine nutritional knowledge and practice. Quite simply, Coleto products are the most effective available, represent value for money, and produce to the highest level of integrity.
I love a sunburned country, a land of sweeping plains, where horses run wild and free. Their beauty never wanes. Through the heat and the dust, they gallop with grace and might. Their strength and endurance, a sight to behold, so bright. Since 1986, Pride's Easy Feed has been nourishing our equine friends, ensuring their well-being till the very end. My love for these horses runs deep as the land. With Pride's Easy Feed by their side, they will forever stand. I love a sunburnt country where horses run wild and free. And in my heart, they will always be.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Bethany, Equine Nutritionist from Pride's Easy Feed. On behalf of Pride's and Kaleido Animal Health, we thank you for joining us tonight. We're privileged to have Dr. Rachel Mottet speaking with us and discussing if your feed or supplement is all that it's cracked up to be. And we are sure that you will get a lot out of tonight. Now, before we start, we do have a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice that your microphones are on mute, and this just helps the webinar to flow smoothly. But this doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. The chat is open, and we would love for you to send through any questions that you would like Dr. Rachel Mottet to answer. And we've allowed some time at the end of the session, and we'll aim to answer all of your questions. Now, to check that the chat is working properly, we would love for you to send through your name and where you're tuning in from. And Dr. Rachel Mottet is a wealth of knowledge, but please do keep in mind that when you are sending questions throughout the time, that she is based in the United States. So doesn't know all of the ins and outs of the supplements and feeds that we have in Australia and New Zealand. So it'd be really helpful if you try to keep your questions less product focused and more ingredient focused, or about the use and requirements of specific supplement or feeds. So thank you to all of you that have sent through your previously submitted questions. Rachel will be answering these prior to the questions that we received from you in the chat. And if you did send through any product specific question, or if you do have a question specifically around the products that you would like to ask in the chat, Natalia, the technical manager from Kaleido, or myself will be able to get back to you in the next couple of days on those. Now, you are actually all able to turn your cameras on or off. So feel free to have them on if you would like. It's always nice being able to see everyone's faces. We'll have a look where people are tuning in from. So we've got people from Victoria, from Queensland, Tasmania, WA, all across Australia. We've got Mary from New Zealand, Hunter Valley, people from all over. So thank you everyone for joining. It's great to have so many of you. Now, as promised, we do have 3 lucky door prizes, and the winners have been randomly selected already from those of you who submitted your questions. There were a lot of them, so thank you for submitting those. And the winners will be announced at the end of the session, so please stay tuned for that. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Rachel Mottet, and then I'll hand over to her. So Dr. Rachel Mottet is a world-renowned independent equine nutritionist and the founder of Legacy Equine Nutrition, based in Ocala, Florida. She has a career spanning collaborations with FEI and Olympic competitors, and she has formulated diets for thousands of horses worldwide. And her recent work focuses on dietary strategies for managing inflammatory gastrointestinal conditions across New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and the United States. So I'll hand over to you, Rachel.
All right, thank you for the intro. Welcome, thank you everyone for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you. Just one second. All right, thanks again for coming. Today, I'm gonna be talking about if your feed or supplement program is all it's cracked up to be. Of course, like Bethany had mentioned, we're focusing more on active ingredients and kind of more general versus talking brand specific. But there are some really good questions and some great info, so you will definitely get something from this presentation if you're feeding a horse. In terms of agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that you should know about your feed, the top 5 things. Of course, there's many more. Top 5 for feed, top 5 for supplements. There were a number of really good questions that were submitted that I'm going to go through. And then we'll take time to answer some live questions. So as Bethany mentioned, You can put those in the chat box as we're going through this, or afterward. We'll get to as many as we can. And then at the very end, we're going to give away some really good prizes. So let's go ahead and just roll into the content. Excuse me, the top 5 things that you should know about your feed. And if you don't know these, you should be able to ask your company. So reach out by their phone number, via email. They should be transparent in the information I'm about to share with you. So the first thing that you might want to ask, is your feed produced in an equine dedicated facility? Now, the reason why this is important is because there are a number of livestock species that will have either some type of medication or ionophore in their feed, or you can end up with ingredients that you wouldn't want in equine feed. So making sure that it's equine dedicated, or at least if the mill does have multiple species, that they have equine dedicated lines that produce the equine feed, that is important. In the US, inevitably each year we have issues of contamination from things called ionophores that are part of livestock feed. And that unfortunately is very toxic and deadly to horses when ingested. So making sure worldwide, whichever country you're buying feed from, that it's equine dedicated and that the lines are equine only is really important. The next thing is your feed formulated by an equine nutritionist. Also important because in the US, and I'm sure over there, there's a number of products on the market that are formulated by people who love equine nutrition, which is fantastic. However, when it's formulated by someone who just loves nutrition, maybe doesn't have the scientific background in formulation, you can end up with imbalanced feeds and formulas. So making sure that it's formulated by someone with expertise and an actual equine nutritionist is very important. The next question, is your feed appropriate for your horse's needs? One of the best ways to figure this out, well, of course, it's how your horse feels under saddle when you're riding them, but also taking a look at the tag and making sure if that feed is formulated for your horse based on their life stage, their workload. A good way to find out, especially, for instance, if you have a horse that's growing, young, or maybe a senior, look on that tag and look for feeding recommendations for that life stage. If you don't see it on there, but you love the feed, you can definitely call the company and ask for more info. But a surefire way to tell if it's ideal for the class of horse or stage of growth you're working with, check out the tag. That's going to be a good clue. The next question or thing to know, are you feeding at the correct feeding rate? I would say probably 60 to 70% of the clients that I work with are not feeding at the correct feeding rate. And the best way to find out, buy a little scale, whether it's a food scale or a luggage scale, put your feed into a bucket and weigh it and find out how much you're feeding per day. Every feed, no matter what manufacturer, no matter what product it is, has a recommended feeding rate. And that's put into place because you need to hit that feeding rate or close to ensure that you get 100% intake of optimal vitamin, mineral, protein, fiber, fat, all the things that you want your horse to get. So when you're not feeding according to the feeding rate, for instance, if you're underdoing it, you can end up shortchanging your horse on critical vitamins and minerals that they need to perform, thrive, and be healthy. So making sure that you're feeding at the appropriate rate is really important. So again, get a scale, something, weigh your feed. I'm sure most of you will be surprised and even take a little guess ahead of time. I think I'm feeding this amount of kilograms. When you weigh it, you'll probably be surprised. The next question, and this can be really difficult to know by looking at the tag. Does your feed contain quality ingredients and nutrients? So the reason that's difficult is because you don't necessarily know what the standards are for the company that's making the feed. So you don't know what kind of checks and balances the feed has probably gone through or the ingredients when they get to the mill. One really good way to tell if you have a quality feed on your hands, you can see it in the quality of your horse's coat, mane and tail, hoof integrity, how their muscle mass looks, how they recover, how they feel. Of course, forage is going to be the pillar of your equine nutrition program, and that's going to be very foundational and the most important piece. But a good feed is going to add shine and bloom on top of a good quality forage. So a lot of times it's seeing is believing and knowing I am feeding a good product. I can tell my horse shines from inside out. They look amazing. They feel amazing. They're healthy, all the things. So this can also be difficult to detect, but I will tell you the way to base this is not based on the percents on the feed tag, because there are a lot of ways to make a feed say 12% protein, 8% fat, 20% fiber. There are a lot of ways to do that with different ingredients, but not all of those mixtures are created equal. So sometimes, and when you buy the cheapest feed in the feed store, you're getting the cheapest formulation. You're not getting that abundance of essential amino acids. You're not getting the best profile and digestibility of good quality ingredients. You're getting some more of the more moderate quality variable ingredients. So that's something to keep in mind, is that those percents can be made in a multitude of ways, and percents on the tag don't indicate quality. So those would be some top things you want to know about your feed. There's a lot more, but those are a really good starting point to know if you're feeding the right product. Now, top 5 things to know about your supplements. There are many of these. I've actually taught courses on supplements because there's so many out there, and it's hard to wade through that sea of different products. But number one, and I laugh while I type this, and I'll tell you why I came up with this. So, oops, sorry, I accidentally stopped sharing my screen. Give me just 1 second. Alrighty, so is your supplement manufactured in a facility, or is it made in someone's garage? So there have been 2 supplements in my career that I've come across that have actually, been manufactured in someone's own home, in their garage specifically. So finding out and making sure that your product is being made in some type of quality controlled facility. Quality control is also important with your feed, but making sure that this is happening is really, really important. In the US, there's very little regulatory oversight when it comes to supplements. So making sure that you're going with a reputable company and something that goes through some checks and balances is really important. And that's the same when it comes to feed companies. Sometimes the big companies or the big players in the industry get some flack, and people want to buy local, they want to buy small. That's totally fine. But the thing to keep in mind, large feed companies are under a magnifying glass in a number of ways. Same with large supplement companies. So they do have more quality controls often. They do have more checks and balances, ensuring that their product is up to par, because if they're putting a lot of it into the market, it has to perform. Something to keep in mind. The next question, is there any peer-reviewed data behind the ingredients in your supplement? So if there isn't, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not feeding a good product, but it can be something worth checking out, because what I do professionally for most of the clients I work with, I review all of their supplements. And so what I'll do is I'll look for the literature and see, okay, for this ingredient, what's been tested, what's been discovered, and what is the optimal dose? Because a lot of supplements are going to have ingredients that might be beneficial, but not all of them have them at the appropriate level. And it can be hard to do that research if you don't have a science background. But an easy way to do it is go to Google Scholar, PubMed, search the word horse, and then that active ingredient, maybe it's gamma-oryzanol, maybe it's tryptophan. Put that in the search box and look through some abstracts and see if you find anything. Or you can hire a nutritionist, work with somebody at a feed company that can help guide you as well. The next question, is your horse a responder? Another thing I do for clients is help them identify, okay, why did we go on the supplement for your horse? What was the intended purpose and function of this supplement? Maybe it was a gut supplement that you were feeding in an effort to mitigate the occurrence of future ulcers. And you've been feeding it for 2 years, yet your horse has grade 3 bleeding ulcers. Supplements really aren't intended to necessarily, they're not going to be as strong as a pharmaceutical agent when it comes to ulcers. However, if you've been on something for several years and you're still seeing a high incidence of equine gastric ulcer syndrome, it might be time to look at another gut supplement. So really thinking about, is my horse responding to this supplement? I'm giving them a calming supplement and I'm not seeing a difference, or maybe I am seeing a difference. So ask yourself, is my horse responding to this? Many supplements we can't really see the impact or the effect. Many of them work internally. So sometimes we don't know, but there are some things like, for instance, a hoof supplement. Are my horse's hooves improving? So really ask yourself, is this doing what its intended function is? The next question, this is very similar to the feed question. Are you feeding your supplement correctly? A number of people I work with also are not feeding their supplements correctly. Check the instructions, check the feeding rate, make sure that you're getting that feeding rate correct. Lastly, are you overdoing it and potentially poisoning your horse? Okay, this is a bit dramatic. It's a bit hard to poison your horse, but you can make a horse sick, and I've seen this happen a number of times by overdoing it in excess. So you have to be careful because a number of supplements also are jam-packed in additional vitamins and minerals that may not be necessary. There's this thing that I would refer to as tag dressing, where you're going to end up with supplements that are intended for a certain function, but have a bunch of other stuff in them that's completely unnecessary. One of the things I think of, companies do this a lot with electrolytes. They'll throw a little dash of everything in there, but they shortchange the horse in the thing that you're really after with electrolytes, that being sodium or salt, sodium chloride. So you need to be cautious of that. And, is that going to poison your horse, those electrolytes with a bunch of things built in? No, not necessarily, but is it going to deliver what you're after to replenish what's lost in sweat? A lot of times, no. So these are things to be cognizant of and consider. Also, if you look at your supplements and you're feeding, 5 times the daily requirement and a number of nutrients, there is a possibility that you could end up with a toxicity or overall imbalance in the program. And vitamins and minerals, they like to work in somewhat of a harmony. Those ratios don't have to be perfect, but it's important to not overdo it, double and triple up on nutrients. So these are some things that I'm hoping would get you thinking about your feed and your supplements. And I know that in that Australian market, having been to Australia a number of times, has really good products available. So these are things to think about and to ask the companies that you're working with. All right, we're going to go right into the questions now that were submitted. And thank you for those who submitted these ahead of time. I don't have your name to pair with the question, but these questions are awesome. So let's just jump in. The first one was about copra. So if you're unfamiliar with that word, that is referring to coconut. And this is actually a byproduct of coconut oil manufacturing. And the copra actually comes from the white kind of fleshy part of the coconut, even though it looks brown, like you can see on my screen. And the question was about using this as a fiber source for conditioning your horse. So the things to know about copra, it's a reasonable source of protein. The amino acid profile in it is not as strong as some of the other things that we use as common feed ingredients. However, it's a reasonable source of protein and also fermentable fiber. The thing about copra that is different than some of the other type of things on the market, it is a little bit higher in fat, usually somewhere close to 8%. So if you are going to use this, you absolutely can use it as a fiber and conditioning agent. It depends on the use. There's really nothing about copra that makes it stand out to me and say, I'm going to pay extra for this individual product because it's better in these areas. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a huge standout when it comes to, for instance, quality protein, but it is a source of, moderate fat, and it's also a source of additional calories. So if you have it accessible to you, you can absolutely use it. The thing to know, copra on its own, it's really not well balanced. So if you are going to purchase copra, make sure it's part of a balanced formulation, something that has some fortification, meaning added vitamin minerals. Maybe it's part of a feed, or maybe it's just a supplement, but you'd want to ensure that it's not, just straight copra off the production line and that it hasn't been fortified. But it's absolutely something you can use if you have access to. The next question, what are your thoughts on haylage as hay replacer and or a pre-ride snack? So haylage is something that I've worked with extensively. I worked at a couple farms in the UK. This was a very long time ago, and everything the horses ate was haylage. So of course, if you're unfamiliar with haylage, which if there's any US people that watch the replay, they have not heard of haylage. 99% of horse owners in the US haven't, because we don't see it at all in the US, hardly at all. So haylage is going to be your high moisture forage that is going to be wrapped airtight with many layers of plastic wrap, like you see in the picture on my screen. Haylage is a great source of forage, especially if you live in a wet climate where it's really hard to dry forage from the field. In the US, we have the luxury of many dry days in a row, typically, where you can dry the hay, flip it over, dry it on the other side. In countries like England and other parts of the world where it rains a lot, you have to think about doing something a bit higher moisture. And there is a way to do that safely and avoiding spoilage when it comes to haylage. And you can see, again, these bales being wrapped very specifically to inhibit mold production from occurring. So my thoughts about haylage as a hay replacement, so that can be your forage source, and or a pre-ride snack. You can absolutely use that. Long stem forage is a great idea prior to your ride to develop that fiber mat in the stomach and to help soak up some of that gastric juice that's going to be floating around in the stomach, help protect the vulnerable portions of the stomach from splashing of that juice. So absolutely a good idea. But my number one question with this question is it already part of that horse's diet? When it comes to equine nutrition and feeding your horse, consistency is really important. So would I feed this as a pre-ride snack or as a forage source? Absolutely. Would I do that pre-ride snack if it's not already part of my horse's diet? No, probably not. Because when we change up the source of fiber, we do introduce or increase the likelihood of digestive upset. Now, if you're just doing, a half a kilogram to a kilogram or maybe a couple kilograms, is that going to be enough to give your horse GI upset? Hard to say. Some are extremely sensitive, but what I would prefer that you do is keep that fiber something more consistent to your horse, unless it's a very small amount. Maybe you're giving a half a kilogram. You can do a lot of things at a half a kilogram and not have it be detrimental to the health of your horse. But I would want to use the long stem fiber that's already part of their diet. But haylage, as I mentioned before, can be a great source of the fiber in your horse's diet. It just depends if it's available. Like I said, in the US, we have virtually zero haylage available. Americans are actually kind of scared of haylage because they don't understand it, but this can be a great source of fiber. The next question, I keep my feed regime simple and add only salt and a mineral supplement to my chaff and oats mix. Is it possible to add too much salt? This is a great question, and I don't know how I end up talking about salt all the time, but I kind of do. I did a podcast on salt a few years back, and when it comes to salt, this is something for every single horse owner. Your horse needs access to free choice salt, and the best form of salt is one that they'll actually consume. Some horses don't like the texture or the taste of the white salt licks. However, horses do have a physiological drive to consume salt. However, the best form is going to be one that they'll actually go to and lick. Like the Himalayan salt blocks, for instance. I promise you there is no magic in those blocks, but some horses do tend to prefer them and actually lick them. So that's your best option. And then also adding it on top of your feed each day. This is something I do with my own horses. The maintenance dose, and I'll mention I do this in addition to free choice salt, but the maintenance amount of salt would be 2 tablespoons per day. You can go up to 4, and that would be variable or dependent on how much your horse is sweating. If you have a horse that's regularly sweating and in hard work, I would suggest doing an actual dedicated electrolyte. So those would be, some good practices for any horse, but making sure they have free choice salt. In terms of overdoing it, it's really difficult to overdo it on salt because horses do have, a natural mechanism or a homeostatic mechanism to maintain what's called osmotic balance in the body. So when they end up with too much, usually it's just going to get flushed out. But the key is it needs to get flushed out. So that horse does need to have access to plentiful, clean water that's free of salt. And I mean, there's very rare cases where horses can have what's called hypernatremia, excessive salt intake, where it becomes toxic. It is extremely difficult to get there. The only time I've ever seen that in my career thus far was in a pasture. For some reason, the salt was very close to the water trough, and the salt ended up in the water trough, and the horse was unable to essentially flush out that extra sodium. It's kind of why we can't survive if we're stranded at sea and we're in salt water. We need fresh water to help flush out that sodium that's not utilized by the body or sweated out. So when it comes to salt, very difficult to overdo it. However, I would say, that 2 to 4 tablespoons is going to be your pretty common dose if you're doing just salt. Looking for an electrolyte, if your horse is regularly sweating, in your electrolyte, make sure that the number one ingredient is salt. So sodium chloride is what should be listed first, and that should be your dominant ingredient in that electrolyte. And then there is, side note, one miscellaneous condition where horses will excessively consume salt. Ironically, I have a horse that does this, that will eat the block within several days' time. That's kind of an interesting habit, oftentimes more of a stereotypy or just a habit, a stress response, or it's something that's not natural. So in that case, you would want to remove the salt. What you're going to end up with is excessive urination, possible toxicity, again, difficult to do, excessive water consumption, not the worst thing ever, but also just not ideal for the horse. So in those cases, you'd want to regulate intake, but it's very, very uncommon that you'd see that. Salt is not the most palatable of nutrients in the world. Okay. The next question, I have a 26-year-old standardbred gelding in excellent health and condition, kept up to date with vaccinations, dental care, farrier, was fed lucerne hay, hard feed daily, prime lucerne chaff, watered down and mixed in well. He's been doing well on this feed for quite some time and has not dropped off any condition, despite his aging years. Well, that's fantastic, because at 26, a lot of times we see a need to up the small particle fiber because they often end up with difficulty digesting long stem hay at this point in life. This goes on to say, I'm a bit concerned. Lately, his urine output has increased quite a bit. Droppings look well formed. Could I be overfeeding him? So this urine output increasing, so me not being a veterinarian, me being a nutritionist, would send you to your vet with this question. There are some conditions that result in polydipsia and polyuria, so that's excess water consumption and excess urination. Some conditions that are metabolic in origin, so you'd want to have your vet do some screening to make sure that that is not related. Something that comes to mind, and I am not diagnosing this horse, of course, not being a vet, horses with PPID. This can be a symptom that you see with that. So this could be a very benign thing, but I would send you to your vet to chat with them. When it comes to the feed, not knowing more about your horse other than its age, it would be difficult for me to say if they're getting the right nutrient balance. However, if the horse is maintaining good body condition, that tells me that they're on the right number of calories per day. The question would become, is it balanced? So checking out your feed tag, you can always call the company too Ask for some direct support from someone who has familiarity with the products and the formulations that you're working with, and finding out if it's the right fit. But again, usually as horses get to this age, late 20s, early 30s, they start to need some forage replacement in a really small particle fiber source. So in the US, we have a lot of what are called hay pellets and hay cubes that we'll offer to horses because they do become less efficient at digesting long stem hay and sometimes their feed in their older years. But it's good to read that this horse has not dropped off any condition. Have your vet check out the increased urine output. The next question that was submitted, why do horses sometimes eat dirt? Is it because of vitamin mineral deficiency? So the thing to know about your horse is they are extremely poor at identifying which nutrients they are lacking. The only thing horses truly have a drive to consume, well, there's a few things: fiber, sodium, and water. Okay, but if your horse is deficient in specific vitamins or minerals, they are not good at detecting that. Sometimes, we'll see a clinical manifestation that can occur over time. Sometimes we don't necessarily see when our horses are deficient, but your horse doesn't have something internally that tells them, I'm short on vitamin A, I'm short on vitamin C. And honestly, that's similar to URI. We don't know. A lot of us have deficiencies if we're not taking our daily vitamin and mineral or eating a balanced diet. We can't tell. It's the same with your horse. Oftentimes, and there are studies that back this up and that show, horses on completely ample and optimal nutrient intake that still will eat and consume dirt. Horses that are deficient that will not. So this has been documented and studied because it's a great question and researchers have asked it too. So a lot of times your horse will eat dirt due to boredom. Some do it, it's something novel. I had a horse owner I worked with, they'd take their horse into a round pen that had dirt on the ground and the horse would eat it. It was new and it was exciting to that horse. So horses are quite investigative creatures. Sometimes they'll eat it just for the heck of trying something new. But more often it's boredom. It can be also lack of fiber. Horses will eat things that are, inedible sometimes too when they are lacking fiber. So that's something to think about as well. But oftentimes it's more of a habit. And domestication, we don't think of it as being something unnatural for a horse, but it of course is in many cases, and how we manage them is a bit different than they live in the wild. So sometimes this is more just something they do out of boredom, but it's not necessarily because of vitamin mineral deficiency. And vice versa, it's possible even if they're not eating, things that are not edible or dirt, their diet can be imbalanced and the horse doesn't know. The best way to find out, look at your feed tag, talk to a nutritionist. The next question, I have a 20-month-old Andy Thoroughbred Cross. He was gelded at 18 months. I'd like guidance on a diet and supplements that will promote his development but not increase his weight. So without having more details on what the horse looks like now, it's really, really difficult to say. But if you go back to some of those recommendations I gave about making sure that your feed is appropriate for this life stage. So at 20 months old, you still have a growing horse. And the most important thing is, good intake, all requirements met. So the first thing you need to do with any horse is maximize the forage. So making sure that they're getting good quality, ideal intake of forage. So making sure they're getting an abundance. On top of that, the question becomes, is my horse able to maintain ideal body condition? Now, we don't want our horses to be obese or over conditioned, especially when they're growing, but we don't want them to be ribby. So what you want to make sure is that whatever you're feeding, it might just be a concentrate, like a ration balancer is what we call them in the US, which is just your daily vitamin, mineral, and a boost of protein, or maybe they need a feed to maintain ideal body condition. So without knowing more about this horse, I would say maximize your forage, make sure they've got free choice salt, At minimum, have a ration balancer. If they need more calories, think about doing a feed. Make sure that it's fortified for that life stage for that particular horse. Now, when it comes to what supplements that promote his growth and development, honestly, good quality forage and at least a balancer or a fortified feed should get your bases covered. Now, I am fairly minimalist when it comes to supplements, but there's really not any silver bullet that's going to optimize growth better than good balanced nutrition and quality feed and forage is going to do. So that would be the foundation of your program. The next question, it has been noted that carbohydrates have an effect on reproduction. What is your opinion? This is a great question because a lot of people like talking about carbohydrates, and I'm guessing that the person that submitted this was referring to non-structural carbohydrates. So those are the starch and simple sugars in the diet. So my opinion, yes, carbohydrates absolutely have an effect on reproduction, but not in the way I'm wondering if this individual was asking. I'm wondering if the question is, do they have a negative impact on reproduction? The answer to that would be no. The body's preferred source of fuel is going to be from glucose and stored glycogen. And the body can use fat for energy too. But when that mare is growing a fetus inside her, she needs energy to do that. And non-structural carbohydrates are absolutely a part of that. Everything, however, in moderation. So what I'm not saying is load your horse with non-structural carbohydrates, feed them straight oats for 50% of the diet. Not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is this is important in the diet. Calories, energy, fuel, all these things that non-structural carbohydrates actually do for your horse that are very necessary. Now, the caveat would be if you have a horse with metabolic dysfunction, that would necessitate, or insulin dysregulation, that would necessitate a low non-structural carbohydrate diet. Otherwise, if you end up somewhere between 20 and 35%, 35% would be on the high end. But if your feed is around that level, and just the feed, not the forage, the feed is that level, that is fine. That's getting kind of elevated if you have a horse with metabolic dysfunction, or if you want low non-structural carbohydrates, aiming for around 10 to 12% of the total diet is just fine, but there is not any negative adverse effect from doing a bit higher in NSCs in a metabolically healthy horse. So good question. A lot of us love talking about carbohydrates in the equine diet, but they aren't as bad as many people make them out to be. And they're very necessary for a number of things that the body's working on, especially growing a young horse and lactating. The next question, which joint supplements have actual scientific research to back their efficacy? Well, these are your key players that are on the screen, your glucosamine, your MSM, sodium chondroitin. You can see the list. These are all ingredients that would have implications. Some would have natural anti-inflammatory activity. Some are going to have joint lubrication and integrity functions. When it comes to the data, I hate to tell you, but the scientific data is pretty poor, indicating that orally fed joint supplements are beneficial to the horse. However, the science is something that is good to be evaluated, but when you tell me I put my horse on this joint supplement and I saw a huge difference, I don't think you're lying. I think that there's actually some horses that do respond to joint supplements that are fed as part of the diet. However, what I would say is if you're using a joint supplement, if you're using it to help offset what you perceive to be discomfort in your horse, you would be able to notice a difference within about 3 to 4 weeks. So if you're using it for that purpose, what I would say is give it a fair shake, give it a try, see what you see. And if you perceive a benefit, if you're buying a joint supplement from a reputable company, that's just fine. Continue onward. If you see nothing, I would say probably not doing a whole lot of anything. If you have a performance athlete, what is really common, I would say in the US, would be to do a monthly injected joint supplement like Adequan. That's something you would absolutely talk to your vet about, not to me about. But when it comes to orally fed joint supplements, I would say the efficacy is pretty hit or miss, but worth a try. But the science really does not support a lot of these ingredients when fed as part of the diet. So keep that in mind and give it a shot, but be a good skeptic, be a scientist when you are trying it. Next question, with the increased number of horses being diagnosed with gastric ulcers, other than feeding hay prior to riding or exercising, what should we be feeding or addressing to prevent this? Oh boy, this is a whole, class on its own. They could make a semester-long course talking about gastric ulcers. So Dr. Ben Sykes is definitely our reference, who's done the most research in this area, has the most data. This is going to vary in terms of what we should be doing to address or prevent this. It's going to vary based on location of that gastric ulcer. Glandular ulcers do not respond the same to management and dietary changes as squamous ulcers do. So because this is such a broad question, I would say good rules of thumb would be offering long stem forage on a continuous basis as much as possible. You don't want your horse to have an empty stomach, and the horse stomach does empty rather quickly. Horses were designed to continuously eat small meals, and for that reason, they have a very small stomach that empties quickly. The stomach, of course, is the target organ for these gastric ulcers and lesions. So you want to keep something in the stomach. There are, so step number one, maximizing forage, working with your vet to come up with a treatment program. There aren't any supplements out there that will necessarily cure ulcers. That is the work of a pharmaceutical agent that your vet will decide what works for your horse. Some horses respond better to omeprazole than others. Some respond to sucralfate. Some respond to misoprostol. Up to you and your vet. You need to scope to find out what severity the ulcers are at and if they've recovered from that medication protocol. After that, there are supplements on the market that can help keep ulcers at bay. Keeping in mind that some horses will respond really well, some will not. That doesn't mean that the products aren't great. It just means that some horses respond better than others. Our sponsor, Kaleido, does have a few products that have data behind them. And I said I wasn't going to talk about products, so I'm not going to go in depth on that. But there are a few products under the GastroAid line that really can make a difference in keeping ulcers at bay. So there's certain things to think about, but check out some of the seminars that Dr. Ben Sykes has done, because he'd be a great reference on all the things you can be doing. There's just too much to cover with that question. Going on, there are many stories about soy affecting horses in various ways. Is soy as big of a problem as it's made out to be? The short answer is no. Soy offers a really good amino acid profile with top high quality essential amino acids that are really helpful for the horse. We grow soy very abundantly in the United States. It's in almost all horse feeds. There is a lot, soy for some reason gets the short end of the stick, or there's many myths about it. There's a few reasons for that. So soy does have something in it called phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens can, with very weak affinity, bind to estrogen receptors in the body. However, the thing to know, there are actually more phytoestrogens and higher concentration in lucerne than there are in soybeans, and much more, level of inclusion of like a lucerne in the diet. So at the level soy is at, there wouldn't be a concern over this altering hormones. When it comes to ingredient allergies, a lot of people believe their horse has a sensitivity to soy. It's possible, but it's quite rare. Individual ingredient allergies are pretty uncommon. It can happen, but pretty uncommon. And in terms of, quality ingredient, soybean hulls, that's an ingredient we see in the US that offers a fermentable form of fiber. So that's something that's added to equine diet. Soybean meal, great quality protein, and soy oil people also talk about soy being inflammatory. When it comes to inflammation, the topic or the conversation is much bigger than, it's got more omega-6s than omega-3s, it must be inflammatory. Not so much. We've got to pause and talk about inflammation more and what inflammation is. But that itself is also a long conversation, and thinking about how much soy oil would be added to the diet, generally speaking, if your horse is getting pasture, that omega-3 content in the diet is still going to be very much more heavy than the omega-6 content. So you can get a lot of good things from soybeans. The thing that you don't want to do is feed raw, uncooked soybeans. The reason being is because those actually have what's called an anti-nutritive factor, that being a trypsin inhibitor. So if horses ingest raw, uncooked soybeans, it actually causes or interferes with protein digestion. So you need to make sure that these are processed in some capacity before feeding them to your horse. And soy offers a lot of great things to the equine diet. I'm not scared of soy. I understand the concerns, but really pretty unfounded. Also concerns over, herbicide or pesticide residue. By the time soy makes it into equine feed or into human food, you would not be able to trace that, or it'd be pretty much negligible at that point. Okay, what is the best supplement for ligament repair? I would love it here if there was also a magic or kind of silver bullet. And ligaments, of course, are connective tissue, or they're mostly collagen fiber. I would say making sure that the horse has optimized nutrient intake. If you want to go the extra mile, could you do like an antioxidant, vitamin mineral supplement? I wouldn't say that that's necessary. When it comes to ligament integrity, perhaps worth trying would be like supplements with silicone, and it's a synthetic version of silicone. But even then, time and rest is really what's going to be on your side, and good balanced diet. There are some things that you can try and fling at the situation just to give it a shot, but I would say really time and rest and ample is all you're going to need. What are your recommendations for an emergency diet plan for horses who are suffering an acute onset of laminitis? And what would you recommend for ongoing maintenance post the acute episode? So number one, figuring out what that culprit is of that acute onset of laminitis. Is it mechanical? Is it some type of colitis or toxin? Is it metabolic in origin? So if it has to do with insulin dysregulation and sugar sensitivity, then I would absolutely work to get the non-structural carbohydrate component low in the diet. And there are ways to do that, using a forage that's low in NSC, using a feed that's low in NSC, small frequent meals versus large meals. There's several methods to target that. But the first thing to ask would be, what was the actual culprit of that issue? Because if it's not metabolic in origin, if it's something more mechanical, or if it's due to an episode of colitis, or if it's due to a fever, that looks a little bit different in long-term management. But if it is metabolic and due to insulin resistance, my job is to deliver as low non-structural carbohydrate load as possible, and to extend the time it takes the horse to eat its daily allotment of feed and forage. Reason being, I'm trying to keep that blood glucose as baseline and as flat as possible. So not trying to give this giant meal that's going to cause that increase in blood glucose more sharply than small frequent meals throughout the day. Also, again, selecting a forage that's lower in non-structural carbohydrates. A lot of times that also means selecting a forage that's more mature. So maybe perhaps a bit more stemmy. The more mature that forage is, the higher in fiber and indigestible fiber that becomes. So the lower the NSC content goes with that as well. So again, depends on the culprit of this onset of laminitis. Next question, signs to look for in insulin resistant horses. Insulin resistance is something that we often see associated with obesity. So when you start to see abnormal fat deposition or crusty neck or fat pads around the rump and around the ribs, those are a few common signs. However, horses can be underweight and also have insulin dysregulation. So it's not only obese horses, I would say in my experience, less common with underweight horses, but horses with PPID, formerly referred to as Cushing's, now more appropriately called PPID, can be underweight, and about 20 to 30% of that population can have insulin dysregulation. So you can have underweight horses also with insulin resistance, but commonly look for abnormal fat deposition and obesity. That's a common association. And not all obese horses will be insulin resistant, but talk to your vet about testing if you're seeing some of those physical signs that tell you something doesn't look right. Next question, there seems to be a lot of products which target horses' recovery post-competition by supplying antioxidants. What benefit is there to supplying antioxidants post-completion of competition? Would you recommend feeding your own or ones you have already blended with feed? What I would say is antioxidants for any horse are beneficial. Oxidative stress is something that occurs naturally with the aging process. It's something that we can see with stress. And we typically think about oxidative stress when horses are exercising. So there's a lot of reasons why we think about providing antioxidants, which can actually bind and kind of inactivate some of what are called reactive oxygen species. Those are free radicals that'll circulate and can do damage to cells if unregulated. So antioxidants can inactivate those and deactivate them in the body, helping keep the body feeling better, help in a number of situations, in a number of systems in the body. So when it comes to feeding antioxidants, I highly recommend doing so, and your horse is getting them whether you realize it or not. There's a number of nutrients that are antioxidants that we don't even think about. But if you have a competition horse or an old horse, making sure that you're getting plenty of vitamin E in the diet. You can find a number of antioxidants in different feeds as well. Instead of just feeding them after competition, I would suggest feeding antioxidants daily. And generally speaking, you want to make sure that you're getting them after that stressful physical event. So typically, if you're feeding your meal of your horse a few hours after hard exercise or hard work, that's just fine. But I would highly recommend putting them as part of your daily diet for your horse. Next question, if a horse is on grass and hard feed with plenty of fiber at home and attends a competition for a max of 3 days. Oh, sounds like we've got some background noise going on. If you guys can make sure that muted. Okay. So is it important to have vitamin E in their feed as an additive? The answer to that would be as long as your horse is getting ample vitamin E as part of their daily diet and they're not deficient, and you can determine deficiency by doing a serum analysis, there isn't a need to give it, as an additional additive. As long as your daily requirement is covered. The interesting thing about vitamin E is horses can actually store it in the body over long periods of time. So if you have a horse that doesn't get, that pasture access for a few days, it's not going to be a big deal as long as they were not deficient going into the competition. And most horses, their most abundant source of vitamin E is the pasture. So as long as they're getting that on a regular basis and making sure that you're getting it in the feed or ration balancer, you'd be okay without that grass for several days at an event. Interestingly, horses that are on pasture at least 12 hours a day for about 6 months of the year will actually store enough vitamin E to fulfill their requirement all throughout the winter. And I would still say make sure you're getting it in the feed or concentrate on top of that, but they can store it over a significant amount of time. And just for frame of reference, the daily recommendation for vitamin E would be around, for your horse at maintenance, somewhere around 500 to 600 IUs. Your horse in competition, more like 1,000 to 1,500 IUs per day. And even though I know many horses will get that from pasture, I always like to make sure on paper they're also getting that, because vitamin E is your most potent antioxidant in the body, does a lot of good. Doing beyond, much beyond the requirement isn't necessarily advantageous, but I do not want to see a deficiency, because deficiencies are detrimental to performance, and deficiency of vitamin E is not completely uncommon, especially in the US, where we rely on a lot of hay instead of pasture. We see it more and more in this country, but I'm sure that you've got some of it over there as well. Okay, just a few questions left before we open it up. Is it better to split supplements morning and night, or just feed once a day? Depends on the supplement. Most of them are fine just once a day. Check out the feeding directions. When it comes to additional protein supplements, I like to split half AM, half PM. There's only so many sites that the body can absorb essential amino acids. So I try and split those ones up, but most are fine just once a day. Next question, I'm struggling to find a good balance for our thoroughbreds, which contains enough fiber and protein, but's not overheating, also maintains weight when in full work, provides energy, but maintains muscle. Trying to keep it simple. If you are trying to, this is kind of hard to find that balance, but if you have thoroughbreds that you're trying to keep weight on and maintains energy, fat is a really good source of that, whether you're doing that through an oil or whether you're doing it through a supplement. Fat can be a great way to keep condition on a horse. When it comes to muscle, of course, we're looking at our amino acid composition. So making sure that the protein is a good source of essential amino acids. It's not the cheap source, but it's a quality source of amino acids. And that's often something you can see in good quality condition, muscle integrity. But if you have, a horse with excess energy, and not overheating, I look to fat as a good way to keep them in good condition. Your fat supplement, if you're going with an oil, it's not going to have the fiber and protein component, because oil is 100% fat. But it's a combination, of course, and more info would be needed to know kind of what the horse looks like. But when you're thinking of energy without a lot of fizz, fat can be a good spot to look. However, some horses are just naturally more up and more animated and more what we'd call hot. So in that case, it might not matter what you feed, but fat's worth a try. The next question, improving your horse's top line. I'm going to be very, very brief about this, just for sake of time. And this is a presentation in its own. Top line is multifactorial. It comes down to good saddle fit, good training, making sure that you're engaging those muscles. In many horses, those muscles are not going to be substantial in terms of their mass unless you're using them. So making sure that you're riding your horse, engaging those muscles. When it comes to nutrition, making sure that your horse is in good body condition, but also making sure that you're providing quality amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of protein. That's what's going to help build the muscle. Those are things that you want to make sure that you're targeting, but exercise and saddle fit also has a lot to do with it. Next question, should I be feeding a toxin binder year round? I currently give them a toxin binder for a few weeks at the change of the season and it works well, but is this something I should add year round? The thing to think about is, what are you targeting with that toxin binder? The toxins that are common in the pasture are ones that currently there is not a good toxin binder for. And it has everything to do with polarity and charge of the mycotoxins that are being targeted. So there are some yeast mycotoxin binders that can target things that you might see more commonly in grains. However, when it comes to mycotoxin, prevalence in feeds, I would say it's fairly uncommon. So would it be harmful to feed a toxin binder? No, not necessarily, but I would think, is it necessary? It wouldn't be something that, I would be as concerned about. However, if you're buying from a reputable company, it's not harmful. just keeping in mind when it comes to pasture, we don't really have a good toxin binder in place that's going to combat your ergovaline, your lalotrim B. Those are the things that would be common in your ryegrass. That's going to contribute to ryegrass staggers and some of those symptoms you see associated with pasture toxicity or mycotoxin issue. And that's something we also don't see at all in the US. We do think about mycotoxins in feed, but like the US, Australian companies will also be looking things like that in their ingredients that would be high risk. So it's something you can do. How much benefit it's going to bring you, I would say, because the pasture toxins have not yet been effectively captured, it's hard to say how much success a toxin binder year-round is going to give you. Next question, are all of these highly processed feeds, so extruded, micronizing, steam flake, molasses coated, similar to us eating processed foods? As horses were never really designed to eat processed feeds, should we just go back to the basics like the old days? So hay and non-processed grain. Is this what is predisposing horses now to having a high rate of metabolic disorders such as Cushing's? So when it comes to the question, this is a great question. Processing actually improves digestibility and nutrient profile of ingredients. And one reason, animal feed ingredients might be byproducts of other industries that don't necessarily have a use in human food, but can be really, really good ingredients. So a lot of people, byproducts, for instance, get a lot of flack, and things that undergo different processing, like maybe micronization, steam flaking, but all of these things can be good ingredients. And micronizing is a process that actually just breaks up and gelatinizes starch and makes it more digestible in the foregut so that you reduce the risk of spillover of starch into the hindgut, which can be actually really bad for the health of your horse, can contribute to colic, laminitis, steam flaking as well. There's a number of processes we do from a manufacturing standpoint that can also help with stability and digestion. Extrusion, that's something that can help a lot with stability. These things are all actually quite beneficial, and they're expensive to do for companies, extrusion and micronizing, the technology to do that, but it improves digestibility of the product. So I would say, thinking about this just a little bit differently, that these actually aren't necessarily not like human food where it's processed. We're not adding a bunch of artificial type of flavors. We're not adding, there are some in some feeds that are not problematic. A lot of times they're really more for palatability, but processing in horse feed is a lot different than processing in human feed. And I would say try and remove the negative connotation because it's actually more of a benefit than anything in most cases. So, and molasses, I would say, it depends on the feed. Molasses, when it comes to equine feed, is actually a bit different than what we see on the human side. And it's not as high sugar or having as high of a glycemic index as many would think it does. It is, of course, though, highly palatable, but it's not as bad as we often think. And there are a number of feeds that have a lower content of molasses, but it does help when it comes to palatability, keeping our horses eating and consuming the nutrients that we want them to get. Okay, advice to horse owners on the East Coast with tropical pastures. Your friend's young horse developed big head disease due to calcium imbalance. You want to ensure the best for your 9-month-old foal. So those unfamiliar with big head disease, this has to do often with high oxalate pastures. So looking at tropical pastures on the East Coast. And what happens is these oxalates can actually bind calcium. And when you have a binding of calcium, you can end up with bone growth abnormalities, and you end up with this issue called big head. It's secondary hyperparathyroidism is the more technical name. And with that, you have to balance out the calcium or make sure that you're getting ample calcium in the diet. And a way that you can do that would be making sure that you've got some inclusion of lucerne in the diet, 2 to 4 kilograms. Also, if you can, limit time for those horses on that pasture, if it's a known high oxalate pasture. There are a few supplements on the market. Pride's makes one, I believe it's called High Cal. That's something you could chat with them about if you live in an area where that pasture is more prevalent. But the best thing to do is to limit or remove that high oxalate source and try and balance it out with lucerne or an actual dedicated supplement. What I would advise against would be sourcing your own calcium supplement. And one of the reasons would just be due to the possibility of metal presence in that. I would say going with a supplement that comes from a company that's either been more properly fortified or has gone through safety checks versus sourcing miscellaneous sources of calcium would be advised. Next question, how do we work out calories for horses? How many calories do horses need per day? Is this even a thing to take in consideration? I know how to calculate people calories to lose or gain weight, but there's no info on horses' recommended daily calorie intake, just how much protein or energy. So how do we calculate how many calories they use? This is almost impossible to calculate how many calories a horse uses. The best determination to know if your horse is getting adequate calories is to look at their body condition. And most horses need somewhere around, for your average 500 kilogram horse, they need somewhere around 16,000 kcals per day, and that's for your horse at maintenance, up to around 30,000 kcals per day for your horse doing exercise. Now, this is highly individual because horses all have unique metabolism. Some need more to maintain ideal body condition, some need less. So those are just kind of a frame or reference, and those values have been established by the National Research Council for the horse. But because this is something almost impossible to determine and gauge, I would say using your horse's body condition score as your guide as to whether they're getting enough per day is a great place to start. And from there, when it comes to gaining or losing, we say in the horse, it takes about 8,000 to 9,000 additional kcals over what they're getting to gain a half a kilogram. So to gain 1 pound, of course, I'm in the US, so we work in pounds, but that would be to gain 0.45 kilograms or 0.5 kilograms. And that's usually about a safe amount of weight gain or loss per day. That looks different than what it is for the human. I believe for the human, it's more like 3,500 kcals, but the best way to determine is look at body condition. If you want to talk more about calories, definitely connect with a nutritionist. It's something I think about a lot and I do some calculating on, but it's very difficult to gauge with the horse, very difficult. For a very athletic warm blood at 17.3 hands doing high-level dressage, what is the best cool feed / ingredient to give him an extra boost without making him hot? I would try fat. Again, I would try going with fat. I might try doing an oil. Some horses are naturally just going to be hot, but fat can be a great way. High fat feed with a low non-structural carbohydrate level. So when I say high fat, I'm talking over 8% fat. And when I'm talking low non-structural carbohydrate, I'm talking about less than 20%, maybe even less than 10%, if there's or around that 10% for very low non-structural carbohydrate. But fat can be your friend. Fat is metabolized differently than starch and sugar. It certainly does not raise blood glucose if it's just pure fat, but this can be a very efficient fuel source that can help take the edge off for some horses. And I believe this is the last question. What are the most important supplements you should be feeding your horse? As mentioned before, there's so far you can go with good quality forage and then water, salt, and either a ration balancer or a feed. Now, there's certain things we're trying. If you've got an equine athlete, adding an antioxidant supplement, adding a supplement for muscle building to see if you can get a bit more out of your horse, trying a calming supplement. There are gastric supplements and gut supplements that work fantastically. I would say start with the basics and do some troubleshooting. Work with a reputable company to find out, is there something in their lineup that could help my horse? You know, all horses are so individual. Give these products a try that you're thinking about, look them up, see if there's any research, and then, you know, see what they do for your horse. If your horse does or doesn't respond, there's a lot of good products out there, but keep it simple. Simple is usually best when it comes to horses. And, you know, your horse, oftentimes how they look, how they feel under saddle will tell you what you need to know. And will give you info on whether or not it's worth trying something in addition to what they're getting. All right. So I tried to buzz through those so we'd have some time. Oh goodness, we went for over an hour. I'm thinking there might be some questions that have popped through, but if any questions are there, I think Bethany, you were going to share those.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. That was fantastic. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come through on the chat. So Nina has asked, I'd like to know about the importance of lysine. And so there's two questions here, the importance of lysine and research around probiotics in horses, please.
Sure. So lysine is actually an amino acid that you'll commonly see on the feed tag. And the reason being is because lysine is our #1 limiting amino acid. What that means is that if you don't get enough lysine, you know, it's the same for humans too, but in the horse diet, you aren't going to have optimal protein synthesis within the body. And lysine is really the only amino acid that we have a known recommendation for, a requirement of. The other ones have not yet been established. So lysine is really critical to ensuring that, you know, when the body eats protein, that protein breaks up into individual amino acids. Those are absorbed, and then you have protein synthesis that occurs within the body. In order for that to be optimized, you need adequate supply of lysine. And you're going to get a fair boost from good quality forage. You can find many protein supplements will have that called out on the tag or will have that added, but it's really key in the equine diet. Like I said, for protein synthesis within the body. Bethany, could you do me a favor and remind me of the second half of that question?
Yeah, sorry, it was completely different there. So, and research around probiotics in horses.
Oh, wow. So probiotics, there's a big body of research, but the probiotic thing and the microbiome of the horse in general, there's a lot we don't know. What I would recommend when it comes to probiotics, you know, looking for specific strains that have, like for instance, there's a few Kaleido products that have very specific research strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is yeast, and in that case, you've got probiotic and some prebiotic activity, and those strains are very well researched in their activity and how it can benefit the horse. So what I would say being careful of, because many products now just have added probiotics because they know consumers like to see them. However, you don't have a ton of data supporting a lot of probiotics that I see in different feeds, in different supplements. So what I would say, you know, the activity of probiotics as live fed microbials is supposed to increase populations of beneficial bacteria or provide, you know, synergistic beneficial activity with those good populations of bacteria. I would say right now, the ability of many of those to do that in the body, we're still getting more understanding on it. The hard thing to study when it comes to probiotics is their actual activity, because the target organ of a probiotic is about 70 feet. So in meters, I'm trying to think of what that would be. I think about 25 meters down the digestive tract. And it's hard to study within that organ. That's the cecum of the horse. So we do the best we can by looking at manure samples, but they don't paint the full picture on probiotic activity. However, as I mentioned, there are some really well-researched and established strains. So when I'm looking at a feed. I personally love the different yeast strains. I think they show a lot of promise when it comes to having benefits to the immune system, also improving fiber digestion. So those different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae I personally like, but there's a lot more we need to learn about probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics. I mean, there's a lot that those do as well in nourishing the beneficial bacteria in the gut for organisms, but keeping the gut healthy, there's a lot you can do with good quality fiber from the forage. So I would say still to be determined when it comes to best probiotics, but we've got a couple that we know of.
Great. Another question was, asked beet pulp and soy meal good feed for horses?
Is beet pulp and soy meal good for horses?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So beet pulp is a really great form of fermentable fiber. And fermentable fiber, so it's a great prebiotic. So what that means, it's going to nourish and provide food and energy for the beneficial bacteria in the gut. So prebiotic activity from beet pulp is really good for the gut. When it comes to soy meal, so soybean meal is a really high quality source of amino acids. You get great protein for it. So both of those are good things that can be part of the equine diet. There are a lot of different ways to do equine nutrition and do it well, but beet pulp and soy meal are two good options. As long as, the thing to know is a lot of these ingredients, when we talk about them individually, are not well balanced. So going with a fortified feed, when I say fortified, again, I'm referring to vitamin mineral balance that has those included, is going to be a better option generally than mixing them on your own. I work with clients that like to mix these things together. You can end up with some real imbalances by doing that. So making sure you're working with a nutritionist, or going through a feed company is a great way to incorporate those and make sure that they're balanced.
Perfect. So going back to, I guess, the initial question around copra, Jojo has asked, how much copra should you feed?
Great question. I would say it really is going to be highly variable on the needs of your horse. Between, between a half a kilogram to a kilogram, I think would be a fairly normal feeding rate if somebody's adding it to add some additional calories to the diet. But I wouldn't, because it's not balanced on its own, if you're just feeding straight imbalanced copra, I would keep the feeding rate really low to, half a kilogram or less. If you're feeding it as part of a product, I would refer to the instructions of that particular product, because there's different products that will have it included that might be specified for weight gain, might be specified for muscle mass. So check out the recommendations from the manufacturer to point you in the right direction. But again, if you're just feeding it as an ingredient on its own, keep the inclusion low because it wouldn't be well balanced on its own.
Isabella has asked, are the sugars higher in haylage than lucerne?
Lucerne would be lower. So typically your legumes like lucerne is going to be lower than what you'd see in grass hay. So when it comes to haylage, you're looking at a grass forage, and that will vary a bit. When it comes to grass hay and NSC, it's going to vary a bit based on maturity and based on variety. And the best way to find out what those NSCs are would be to actually do a forage test. But lucerne is typically, that would be lower.
Okay, great. So we have Usami, who is from the UAE, and they've asked, what do you recommend for horses not drinking sufficient amount of water during the day, particularly in very hot weather conditions?
I definitely would recommend doing, adding salt to the diet. Salt can be a great way to do it if that horse is sweating a lot. Looking at an electrolyte, again, making sure that salt is the first ingredient. Something that I do with my own horses to encourage drinking water would be 2 tablespoons of salt per day. if you do go with an electrolyte, for instance, if your horse is in moderate work and you've got a 500 kilogram horse, your requirement of sodium is going to be somewhere around 17 grams. So that's pretty significant. So if you're listening, still and remember that number, take a look at your electrolyte supplement and see if it gets even close, because a lot of the electrolyte supplements that I look at do not have enough salt or do not have enough sodium. So that's something they'll get a little bit from other places in the diet, but if you're feeding a targeted electrolyte or salt, you should be getting quite a bit from that. So with my own, I added AM, PM to the diet, make sure mine are getting it. That would be the best spot that I would start.
Great. So we are kind of running out of time a little bit, more mindful of time. So just will flag one more question for you. So the question is, do you think Agnus castus or Vitex, which is also known as chasteberry, has a role in preventing the development of PPID?
Yeah, great question. So this is something that I did a little literature review on recently. What I would say is I think it could have the potential, but I do think that more research is needed. I think that it's possible that it can influence the pituitary, but to the extent and the amount needed to do so, I don't think we have that answer yet.
Great. All right, thank you for that, Rachel. So there are a few more questions within the chat, but this session has been recorded and Rachel has offered to actually answer those questions for you. So we'll send those, the answer to the rest of those questions out for you. So thank you, Rachel. And it would be great if you could all join me in thanking Rachel for her time and valuable insight tonight. I've got a lot out of it and I hope everyone else has. And it is very early hours of the morning for her as well. So a very special thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me. This was really fun. As you guys can probably tell, I could talk for hours about this. So I would just keep going if the questions kept being asked, because these are great questions.
Yeah, there's so much we could keep chatting about, that's for sure.
Thank you.
And now to the Lucky Door prizes. So thanks everyone again who submitted your questions. So the winners of those prizes are Ainsley Wilkins, Belinda Flynn, and Amanda Arndell. So congratulations to each of you. You have won either a prize from Collator Animal Health or from us at Prides. So we will email you your details to arrange your prizes being sent out to you. So yeah, just wanted to say again, thank you to all of you for joining us tonight and for all of your questions. It's certainly been very engaging and we hope you got a lot out of it. And as I said, the session has been recorded, so we'll send that out to you via email so you can recap on any information that you wanted to come back to. And as I said, those questions that we didn't get to, we'll send out the answer to those in the recording as well. So thanks again, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your night. Thanks, everyone.